I think what we're going to do at this point is you've had there's a lot to digest here in what both Dr. Gianobili and Dr. McGuire have already presented. Dense presentations, I mean, in the sense of rich presentations, not the other meaning. And I would like to ask you, and I will do the same, to hold your questions until after our panelists have already also had a chance to weigh in on translation and some of the other critical success factors that you need to be thinking about. We'll have ample time, as David alluded to at the start, for Q&A after the panel discussion. But in order not to rush our panelists, who already have been given a tough assignment of answering their questions initially in about 5 minutes, on topics they could each speak to, I'm sure, for hours, I'm going to introduce them at this point. We will start with Kay Fuller, who's been referenced many times already. Kay is president of the Medical Device Regulatory Solutions Company, and she's been working with the consortium closely and in very important ways from the start through her regulatory company to integrate these strategies in a way that supports not just regulatory approvals, but successful product adoption. And I think the fact that she understands how important linking those two things has been a real benefit to the consortium. So I'm going to ask Kay to talk briefly about regulatory as a critical success factor in translation. Kay, are you here?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. I can't see you yet, but I can hear you.
Okay. Hi, Jeannie. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I want to thank Dr. McGuire and Dr. Ginobili for their wonderful presentations as well. Many of you I've had the good fortune to work with over the last several years in helping you prepare for this long journey from idea all the way through development, through preclinical validation to clinical validation, and then eventually, we hope, FDA clearance or approval, which will enable clinical adoption of your novel therapies. I would just like to focus on a few areas that some of you are moving into now that you're finally got your therapy designed and pretty much frozen to where you're ready to start your GLP studies. You're making your product under GMP, good manufacturing practice conditions. And then you'll eventually run that study under GLP conditions. Keeping in mind that why are we doing these studies under GLP conditions has everything to do with being able to enable a successful permission to test your product in humans. And that's through an FDA submission, either an IDE for clinical studies for devices or an IND for therapies that are drugs or biologic based. And the thing that we sometimes forget is why does the FDA want us to really study these preclinically in an animal study? It's really to demonstrate initial safety, initial efficacy in an in vivo model. I know that we all talk about that, but demonstrating that successfully to where you have enough data to give the evidence to the FDA, that FDA can say, yes, it's reasonable that you can move this investigational agent now into human beings, is such a critical step. And so one of the things that might happen as you get your GMP grade product ready to start your GLP study, you may not realize, but you have to have all of the records, the documentation package that goes with that good manufacturing practice of your product. You need to keep the batch records, or if it's a device, the device history record, all the evidence of how that product was manufactured under GMP has to be a record. And it's a really good idea for the investigators to make sure that you have access to those files before you start your GLP study. And the reason I mention that is if something doesn't go right in your GLP study, and believe me, that does happen. We learn things in our GLP studies that if something goes wrong, for example, you find that one of the GLP subjects, if you will, animals, gets an infection. You have to sometimes go back to your sterilization batch records to make sure the product was actually sterile, or did it have pyrogens? And a product can be sterile but still be pyrogenic. And so you want to make sure you have access to those sterilization records to make sure they passed prior to initiating that GLP study. And the real reason I'm focusing on this is when you finish your GLP study, and hopefully successfully, if you had any problems during that GLP study, we still have to explain that to the FDA under your IND or your IDE submissions. For example, under an IDE submission, there's a section in that IDE submission that talks about reports of prior investigations. If you had a problem in your GLP study, the FDA's regulations state that you have to understand what the problem was and what did you do to investigate the problem to put in a corrective action so that it doesn't happen again. And while this is maybe too much regulatory speak for one day for all of you, and many of you are moving into this GLP study. We're about to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in these GLP studies. My guidance is make sure you have batch records from the GMP manufacturer. Make sure you have access to those so you can resource them should you need them if something doesn't go right in your GLP study, such that you can do an investigation and make corrections. If you do that, it will help you streamline the timeline and the journey that you're about to embark upon. And you'll have evidence that you have corrected the problem to be successful with your IND or your IDE submission once you're asking the FDA for permission to initiate your human trials. You've endured a lot. Thank you for putting up with this. Jeannie, is there anything else that?
I think there'll probably be other things at the Q&A. We've got a lot of time for people to ask specific questions. And I wanted just to mention, because I'm getting some questions about this, the way that's going to be handled, and you can start.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Can you not hear me?
I heard part of you. You cut out.
So if you all look at the Q&A icon on your bottom, that's where you can direct questions to individual panelists or Dr. McGuire, Dr. Gianobili. So feel free at any point to direct your questions there. Do not use chat and do not raise your hand because we can't see that from most of the participants. So use the Q&A function and we will return to those at the end of the panel discussion. Is that clear? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, so the next panelist, thank you very much, Kay. That was valuable and clearly, as we've all acknowledged every step of the way, a critical piece of getting a medical device or biologic or drug to market is this regulatory piece. The next panelist is Sam Lynch, who is founder and chairman and CEO of Lynch Biologics. Sam has also been involved with the consortium from the start and brings experience with startup companies in this space, beginning with biomimetics, where he launched GEM21S, the PDGF product, and now at Lynch Biologics. I'm going to ask Sam to talk briefly about financing and other business-related challenges in a startup company as a critical success factor in translation.
Okay, thank you, Jeannie, very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. I want to certainly thank the Resource Center and Mitsumi and NIH and NIDCR and everybody, all my friends and colleagues that I see here today for participating in this panel. I think it's appropriate to maybe start with a little bit of very quick history and then go into the financing discussion. But just to put in perspective what we're all trying do here today and the importance of what we're discussing. 25 years ago, when I started this journey on translational medicine and dentistry, it was not as nearly as well received as it is today. When I left a promising academic career and went on to partner with Geishlik to launch BioOS and BioOS Collagen and BioGuide in North America, South America, and most of Asia, I got a lot of questions from academic colleagues about why I would want to do that. And when I started talking to them about the importance of translational medicine and translating our scientific discoveries into products that enhance and improve patient care, I got a lot of blank looks and head shaking from my colleagues at the time. And so it's really gratifying to see that NIH and NIDCR is now putting such importance on this topic, and I applaud them for doing that. As you've heard already a lot about this morning, this is a long and complex process to go from a scientific discovery to a product approval, and then even more importantly to commercialization. And not only is it long and complex, but it is also very costly. And no matter how good your ideas are, if you can't get the financing to fund the development of the technologies that you're working on, it will ultimately fail. So while everything we're talking about today is critically important, and just like links of a chain, if any one link breaks, the entire chain breaks. But certainly financing is one of the most important aspects because it enables everything else to happen. So I thought I would just talk for a minute about what are the sources of capital, just in terms of big buckets, and kind of lay the 30,000-foot perspective. And then maybe in the Q&A and later this afternoon, we can talk about those concepts in more detail. So I identified 7 buckets of sources of capital. There may be several more, but there are at least these 7. So as you all know today, there's NIH and NIDCR, and that's again great, and it's wonderful to see that happen over the last few years when it really was not accessible 20-25 years ago. There's your own, so second, there's your own credit cards. The inventor, the entrepreneur, the scientist, can self-fund some of these ideas, or you can get your friends and family to self-fund or to help you fund some of the early stages of development that can, like a lot of these things, they have their own pros and cons, and certainly that can lead to some awkward Thanksgiving dinners if it doesn't happen to go particularly well. So, be careful with that one, but that's certainly an opportunity. Third, there's venture capital, and fourth, private equity. I kind of put these two together. They're institutional investors that can invest in your company early on. Venture capital is typically an earlier source of capital than private equity. And again, we don't have time right now to talk about the nuances of the difference between those two, but we can hopefully have time to do that later. Fifth, of course, there's the IPO and the public markets. And that can be typically a source of much larger capital to really fund the commercialization steps, and not so much unless you're in a biotech company, then you can get investors to invest very early on with your early stage ideas. But for most of us, especially in the dental craniofacial world, IPOs are typically reserved for later stage opportunities. Sixth, of course, is corporate partnerships, and these can be extremely important. It is exceedingly rare for a company to start from scratch, to develop the ideas, the products, the technologies, and to be able to successfully commercially launch those products. It's just entirely different skill sets and entirely different organizational structures that are required. So corporate partnerships are certainly critically important as a source of capital. And seventh, of course, and ultimately perhaps there's M&A, mergers and acquisitions. Jean and Maria, I know, are going to talk more about those next, and licensing opportunities and so forth. But that is also, you know, a source of capital. And I know I'm out of time, but just to reiterate, there are pros and cons to each of these 7 sources of capital that must be weighed very carefully. And as many people have mentioned, you know, really understand what your goals are here in terms of getting the technology into patient care. Because that will help you understand which of these 7 or more sources of capital that you really want to identify on. And I will say I've used all 7 of those at one point or another in my companies. We have, you know, I've done the credit cards, you know, with my wife and I, funding our early stage development, to VCs, to private equity, been fortunate enough to take a company public and do an IPO, and corporate partnerships and M&A. So they each have their roles at various stages of development of your companies and of your technologies. So Jeannie, I'll stop there and hopefully have an opportunity to talk in more detail later.
Right, and again, we'll have question and answers at the end, and also our panelists will be part of the power dating or networking that's going to be happening after this session too. So you're going to get a chance there for specific ITP projects to have a deeper conversation. This is really kind of a teaser, and I know it's probably pretty painful for you because we could listen to every one of you all afternoon. Okay, so the next panelist is Jean Dorf. Jean is Group VP of Implants at Dentsply Sirona. He has experience in this space from his time as a senior leader at Johnson & Johnson when they acquired Aura Pharma. And now through the implant division at Dentsply Sirona, they also have regenerative products, and he recently acquired Datum Dental from Israel, a regenerative company. Most of you, I think, know that Dentsply Sirona is the world's largest dental professionals company. So Jean has a vast amount of experience in this space. And I've asked Jean to talk briefly about licensing and partnering with major companies as a critical success factor, and what companies like J&J and Dentsply Sirona are looking for. So take it away, Jean.
Yeah, hey, thank you, Jeannie. And yeah, I appreciate the introduction. And it's also, you know, very good to be here, you know, with everyone this afternoon. And I actually am enjoying the conversation, you know, listening to Mike and Will talk about their journeys and how they are viewing clinical development. And I'm always interested to hear what Sam has said regarding, you know, his success and his pathway to get there. But I think I bring a different point of view, coming from what some people might refer to as big dental, you know, one of the larger, you know, companies in the dental industry, and you know what our approach is to licensing and acquisition, you know, what we may be looking for, and some of the, you know, the words and wisdom that I can share, you know, with the team and participants today. You know, there were some very accurate statements, you know, made by Mike, and you know, when he talked about study design and having a well thought out study design, and you know, and having meaningful study results, because you know, really, when a manufacturer is looking to license something, you know, we are looking to license something that we can commercialize, and those study results, that data, you know, leads us to what the label is going to be and ultimately what we are going to market. And so it's very, very critical to have a well thought out study and some, you know, very strong results. You know, as large companies, when we look into, we're looking at licensing and acquisition. Quite honestly, for us, license and acquisition is really, it's better for us to buy than develop. Fortunately, large companies generally tend to be financially healthy. They're strong, and if there is space that they're interested in moving into, buying something that or licensing that is somewhere in the stages of the development is always more attractive than going into our own labs and developing on our own. And so the further in the development pathway, naturally the more interest that we will have in a product, and the greater the value. But when we're looking, and we do see, many opportunities come our way. When we're looking, for products, yeah, what I can tell you is, it's really important to be clear on the value. Whatever the technology is that is being created, we will be looking at it from the perspective of, how clear is the value? What is the value going to be to the patient? And in our case, what it is going to be to the dentist? Is it very clear? And can you articulate the value clearly? The clinical proposition, as well as the clinical use or utilization. Be very clear on the problem that is being solved and why you may be solving that problem better than others. It's important to think about, particularly when you're in the development phase, to think about ease of use and simplicity. Any products that are more complicated tend to run into commercial obstacles. So how will the product be applied? How will it be stored within an office? These are things that we don't always think about up front, but they can really pose a challenge to a product down the road if we haven't thought about the ease of use of the product and the simplicity. We get too focused on the clinical benefit. Where will the product fit in terms of the overall value chain? Is this a product that may have great clinical benefit but add cost to the dental procedure? And then who will be absorbing that cost? If it's a product that's going to add quite a bit of cost to the procedure, it really needs to be able to provide some, very strong clinical benefit to have a high degree of commercial success, because often the cost is borne by the dentist or practitioner who is using the product. It is not always passed on to the patient. I think I did mention, we prefer, we like to work in the license and acquisition area. We work to help companies fund technologies. If there is a concept and some level of proof, that usually starts with some level of lab proof, maybe some IP that is protected. There's something tangible there. There is funding available, early stage funding. And we will prefer products over technologies, but we do not shy away from technologies. And we will often look at a technology that an inventor has and consider other ways to deploy it within our portfolio. So certainly we want to see everything that you have to offer, but we will bring our science minds to the meeting, and we may be looking at things and considering how to deploy them differently, or in partnership with you, and those can be some very interesting opportunities. I would not always look at a competitor to your product as someone who you should not talk to. Competitors may actually be, people who you think have a competing product may actually be very good partners. The manufacturing process and packaging will always be evaluated. How will the product be manufactured? What is that manufacturing environment going to be like? Will it be stable? And will it be repeatable? And we tend to look at the entire ecosystem of the manufacturing process, not only where it will be manufactured and how it will be manufactured, but what is the cost? What is the transportation? What is the location? Sometimes products are manufactured offshore, and there may be different risks associated with that. And so we will evaluate the manufacturing process as well as the manufacturing environment. Then the other point that was made, FDA approval. Well, this is something we are all striving for, and it's important to the overall success. It's not necessarily the point of exit. just having an approval does not mean a guarantee of success. That approval needs to be translated into some type of commercial value proposition that can be marketed and can be sold. And the approval in and of itself, it is simply not that. So, those are the things that we often think about. As I look at my other notes here, I think that a number of points have been hit on already, and I look forward to the Q&A session later on. So
Thank you so much, Jean. That was great. Our next panelist is Maria Ryan. Maria is Vice President and Chief Clinical Officer at Colgate-Palmolive. Maria has experience on both the academic and corporate side of this space. In fact, when I first met Maria, she was like a lot of the ITP project leaders in a university at Stony Brook, intimately involved in bringing a new drug called Periostat to market when Collagenics was formed. She, I think, learned a lot of good lessons from that experience. And more recently, she's now, of course, in a senior role in leading the clinical program in a well, commercially well-known to most of you company with a major consumer focus. So what I'm asking Maria to do is talk briefly about her unique experience and any tips on licensing and partnering with major consumer companies such as Colgate as a critical success factor. So take it away, Maria.
Thanks, Jeannie, and it's great to see everyone on this call and to see how far this center has come and the work has come since I think my initial conversations with Dave and Will and Jeannie. It's just amazing to see the work moving forward. And like Sam, being an academic and then deciding to go into industry, you get a lot of, where are you going? What are you doing? But it's really, the connections with industry that enables these things to become a reality. And so it really takes a team. And what I see here is a team of clinicians like Mike and the McGuire group, of academicians, of people in industry, and thought leaders that help to move all of this forward. So it's really, really exciting to see this all come together. So, Jeannie has asked me to talk about licensing and acquisitions. And, I think Colgate's been around for over 200 years. And greater than 50% of the innovations that we bring forward come from our partnerships with external collaborators. So we are constantly looking at new technologies, and licensing is one way of interacting with investigators. And there are many places where you can license or acquire technology. And that includes from universities, from other companies, from private inventors. We have an open innovation submission portal where people submit technologies all the time for us to review and to consider. And then, of course, people sometimes they just know us and give us the call and say, is there an interest in partnering or working together on various projects? And we work with centers like Plug and Play, which is a Silicon Valley group, which has lots of startup companies where there might be some opportunities for us to do things together. And when it comes to licensing, there are two kinds of agreements. It can be an exclusive agreement where we would pay more for that agreement, but it could be non-exclusive. So for example, if you were creating a coating for implants, you might want to work with multiple implant companies. You might want to apply it to various areas. So, it's important to think of that. As Jeannie said, we met a long time ago when I worked at Stony Brook University, and we had several technologies that were developed within the department that I eventually chaired. One of them came from a 10-year merit award that Larry Golub had, where he developed Periostat, which was the first FDA-approved post-modulatory agent. And Jean might remember it because it was originally licensed from the university by J&J. And they had an exclusive license to the technology and helped us to move it through the phase 1 and safety studies and phase 2 studies, submit the IND and move through those, phase 1 and phase 2, and then eventually spun off a company called Collagenics Pharmaceuticals, which did the phase 3 studies and got the money from all the places that Sam mentioned to continue to move that technology forward. And so, and eventually spun off to develop Collagenics Pharmaceuticals, which had the sales force and commercialized it, etc. So, it is a long journey. For some people, Colgate, we conduct over 200 clinical studies a year. So they may get a product, do all the preclinical work, and then want to work with us where we can help to do some of that clinical research to take the product to the next level. So when we make a license agreement, you have to think about several things. One is the field of use. Is it just oral care or is it dermal as well? And I saw on the graph there that many of you are working in both spaces because there are a lot of connections there. Financial terms, the upfront payment will be much higher if you have moved the process along more than if you were just in the preclinical phase where, we may only pay for patent costs or less than if it was much more developed. Royalty for people working in universities and departments, depending on how that's structured, usually comes when a product is commercialized and can be based on sales. And then there are a number of milestones that need to be reached. If you reach a certain phase, you can get a certain amount of money. So if you have your IND or your NDA, etc., you may receive payments based on reaching certain milestones. And then if it becomes commercialized based on the amount of sales. And most universities have a minimal licensing fee because if you don't keep up with the time frame towards commercialization, the university can actually take back the technology so that someone can't just sit on it. So, Jean said you might want to go to a competitor, you might not. So you want to be sure that if a competitor is licensing your technology, it's not to bury it, but to build it up as another option, another thing for them to sell. So that usually comes in as part of licensing agreements. Other types of agreements include an option agreement where we might not license, but we have a right to first refusal. So we might give some upfront money. Let's see how things look after a year. Maybe it might be an exclusive agreement, and then we can proceed with a licensing agreement if all goes well. Or we could develop a collaborative research agreement where we could outline research for the year. We may fund that research. So it could be funded by the larger company like us with a right to first refusal as the research moves along. And then finally, mergers and acquisitions. You can either acquire the entire company, like Colgate recently acquired Hello, we acquired Tom's. In the skin health space, we have really acquired 3 major companies, Elta MD, PCA Skin, and Filorga, to really grow skin health within Colgate. And those acquisitions can be either cash or stock transactions. And then you can acquire some of the assets instead of a whole company. So it would be an asset purchase agreement where we might only want some of the assets within a company. And this way we assume less of the liability of the previous company. And then of course, mergers is what Colgate-Palmolive is, right? It was a merger of Colgate and Palmolive that created this joint company, Colgate-Palmolive Company. And then the last thing I would mention is joint ventures, where companies are not merging, but instead are partnering. So if somebody does something that we're very interested in, so for example, in China, insurance is now a new area that's developing. So we're very interested in helping to bring technologies forward there and to work to elevate oral care. And so Colgate and an insurance company come together in a joint venture to provide services and products that elevate oral care in an area of the world like China. So there are lots of different things that people can do together. But all in all, I think we all need to work as a team, as I said in the beginning, to make it happen, because it's not a one-man job for sure. And you need all the help you can get. So I think it's wonderful that we're all here together, and I look forward to the discussions.
Thank you very much, Maria. That was great. Our next panelist is Donna Jansen. Donna is Managing Director of Jansen Consulting. Donna has extensive experience with several products that I would categorize as change of behavior products in this space, starting with Noble Pharma, when osseointegration was first introduced in this country and in Canada, laying the foundation for the dental implant industry, which some of you may have noticed has grown a bit since then. After that, she was CEO at Biora, where she launched Emdogain into this space, a PMA product with a lot of biologic properties, and Donna successfully sold that business to Straumann. I'm going to ask Donna to talk about some of the critical success factors that are needed for a successful product launch, especially when a change of behavior product is involved. Thank you, Donna.
Sorry about that. Thanks so much, Jeannie, for the invitation, and to the Resource Center. It's a real privilege to be included with the other members of this panel. They're all outstanding, and to support the very important work you're doing. So I'm delighted to be here. As Jeannie said, I've had the opportunity to launch a couple of first-in-class products, device, drug, and a biologic, though we got it through as a device. So have a few bruises and scars from that, and very different experiences. And the two I'd like to mention today are Emdogain and Auraverse. Emdogain was a specialty product versus Auraverse that was a general dental product. And I have to say, my heart's with specialists. It's a much easier launch. It's a smaller market. It's generally less expensive to launch into. The KOL network is extremely strong, very effective, and the group as a whole is in general less price sensitive. You go over to the GB side, it's so large, fragmented, targeting and segmentation, which are key, are really difficult to do. You have to partner very much with associations, other partners, educational institutes to get any presence in that market at all. With Emdogain, we actually operated a little bit in stealth mode. We didn't have a lot of money. We did a very traditional marketing approach, top-down KOLs. We had KOLs involved in our clinical studies. Mike, you're absolutely correct. That's very important when you get to launch. If you have no names with you, it's very difficult to get the market's attention. We had a direct field sales force, very small, and we chose very carefully what events and meetings we went to and made sure to look professional and strong at those meetings. But we were really under the radar of a lot of companies. And as we just continued to play our game, we got more and more adoption, more and more recognition. And then the bigger guys woke up and said, where'd they come from? And by then we were somewhat entrenched. And I think that was a big benefit to our success. Field sales force was very small. I think I started with 6 and went up to only 10. And I'm learning through the entrepreneurs I'm working with in the VC company I consult for, that they're really changing. Are they as relevant today? With all the digital tools and marketing and social media, there's so many other ways to touch your customers. I believe there is a need for a sales force, but I think their role is changing, and COVID has certainly shown us that in many, many ways. I think they'll just be far more utilized to educate and to bring value to that customer. They don't, especially the younger guys, some market research I've done, the young clinicians, they want to get their information online. They don't want a rep coming into the office. So I think we really have to look at field sales forces. We chose not to use a distributor. I'm still not a fan for first-in-class products. I just don't think they get the attention, though I know one of the major distributors now has a specialty division to take on small companies with a sales force, I think, of about 45 people. Fairly new, so I don't know how that's worked out real well, but distributors are very tough to get any attention at all when you're a young new technology. Auraverse was very, very different from us. The patients absolutely saw the need to get rid of their numbness after a dental procedure quickly. The dentist did not care. Despite doing market research, despite doing pricing sensitivity research with large ends, very large ends, and a pros as well, we just could not get the dentist to really get passionate behind a patient maybe getting numb an hour and a half, or getting unnumb an hour and a half to 2 hours sooner than they would normally. We even tried to do a little bit of consumer advertising in test markets, and that I could warn everybody, do not do it until you have an established base of customers. You can't get directly to the consumer. The first thing they will do is go to their dental office and say, have you heard about this? Yeah, I tried it, doesn't work. And so you're done. You'll spend an awful lot of money. So make sure you have a strong, big base of customers that will support you should patients walk into their office. The other thing in the GP market that I found, I mean, we all know how important research is. We all know that it's critical, must have it, has to be high quality. The average general dentist in practice does have no understanding for the cost of that research, for the cost of the whole development, the regulatory costs that go into it, the cost to launch. They don't know and they don't care. They just, so that makes it very difficult. And specific to research, because they don't understand it very often, education is critically important. And you're really lucky if you have a product that requires a hands-on component to it, because that gets dentists in a smaller, more intimate environment and to play with the product in a safe environment. Auraverse didn't have any hands-on component, didn't need one. So you have less opportunity to get in front of them from an educational point of view. We also found that the KOL network in the GP market was very different from the specialty market. And despite us getting a great review from Gordon Christensen, buying thousands and thousands of his publication and sending it out, it didn't move the needle at all. What moved the needle was KOLs, in some respect more locally than nationally in our experience. And the other issue that was really big for Auraverse was that it was a drug. And dentistry isn't used to using drugs as therapeutics so much. Anesthetic, they hardly consider it a drug because it's been around forever and they are very comfortable with using it. This really scared them, despite the fact it was an old drug used in medicine safely and successfully. That was a real barrier for them. So lots of things we thought we knew. We had done our market research. We knew the patients loved it. We knew it was effective. The safety was incredible. Really tough market launch. It's still on the market today and doing okay, but it never became the success that we had hoped it to be early on. Dentists are very slow adopters, as you know, and investors also lose patience, especially if they're medical investors. They are fine with glitches in regulatory, glitches in clinicals, not so fine with glitches in the market. They expect once you have all that in place that you will grow and the hockey stick will come into effect, which is very difficult in dentistry. And you also have to watch, you're looking for adoption, but lots of the times you get trial, and that is not adoption. And also what you'll get is early adopters who very often are not your good customers because they'll try anything new for a little bit. So you really have to segment and know your customer to be successful here. And I want to leave you with two things. Focus. It is so tempting as a young startup to want to explore new indications, want to explore new markets, until you feel that you're somewhat successful and established. I would discourage you from doing that. You will get spread too thin. You will not be able to focus where you need to focus the most, which is on your current indication and your current market. So please wait just a little bit longer. I've seen companies fail drastically for that. And the other thing is, to come back to Sam's point, is funding. If at all possible, get long-term committed investors. Take as much money as you can now, because you never know what will happen tomorrow, and it will always take longer and cost more than you think. Is that okay, Jeannie?
Absolutely, Donna. Thank you very much. That was extremely helpful. And our last panelist is Greg Bosch. Greg is here as CEO of Geislich Pharma North America, which is the leading company in the oral regeneration space globally. I'm going to ask Greg to talk about how it actually is possible to build a fully integrated global company in this space with a focus on regeneration. Is an uplifting success story for our last panelist to share. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Jeannie. And if next time I am going to ask not to go after Donna, that's a rule. But first, thanks to Dave and Matsumi and the whole Resource Center for the invitation. Congrats. This is really incredible, the progress you've made. And thanks also to Dr. Ginobili and Dr. McGuire. I've seen you both present many, many times. And every time you present, I learn something new, both scientifically and then all the incredible visual graphics on these PowerPoint slides. So that's very cool. My responsibility is responsible for Geislich Pharma North America. So I'm going to give a perspective on the global perspective, but I really have to defer to my colleagues and the leadership in Geislich Switzerland, who really have been able to build this company so well over the many, many years. Many of you probably have heard of Geislich. You probably all know the terms BioOS and BioGuide, FiberGuide, and Mucograft, but you have to very quickly go back to the early 1980s when Dr. Peter Geislich, this is a family company, it's 170 years old now. Dr. Peter Geislich figured out how his core business in terms of processing tissues could actually enter the dental market. And he developed a KOL relationship with Philip Boyne at Loma Linda University, which is really one of the key points I want to bring up. You've heard it from many panelists today, is developing that network of your key opinion leaders to really build on science. I think the interesting thing about the dental industry, especially the specialists in perio and oral surgery, they want data. They deserve the clinical expertise and facts to really substantiate why your product, even as much as you believe in it and the novelty of it or the uniqueness of it, what does it do for the patients? And so what Geislich has been able to do, literally since the mid-1980s, when BioOS first launched in the mid-1990s, when BioGuide then launched, Mucograft followed, and so forth, is what it's done is, to Donna's comment, it is focused very clearly on doing a couple things really, really well. We have not been a company that's gone out and bought technologies. We've not done the M&A, the acquisitions. We've really built on a couple core platforms, matrices, collagen matrices, and so forth, which help us go we're an inch wide and a mile deep in terms of what we do. And it's really excellent. And the company set up initially just 1 or 2 countries where it was trying to represent the products directly. Everywhere else, it slowly built a network of distributors. In the UK, it formed a company and so on and so forth. And interesting, as Sam Lynch brought up a little bit ago, Sam was one of the first folks to really help put BioOS and BioGuide on the map here in the United States. Peter Geislich established a distribution partnership with various companies and partners around the world. And over time, it has morphed and turned those distribution relationships into company-owned affiliates. As an example, in the United States, the Geislich company became its own representative only in 2012. So basically 9 years ago, and just about the time I was joining. Up to that point, it's been using distributors, and it's had the same kind of approach in Australia and most recently in Japan, where it's taken a distribution relationship and turned into a direct and wholly owned affiliate. So as Donna pointed out, focusing on doing a couple things really well, and that is manufacturing and science and KOL relationships around our core competencies. So if I was starting a new co today in the dental industry, I'll try to do a couple things really, really well. And I'm mindful, because I spent my whole career in the medical device pharmaceutical industry. And just to give you some perspective, Henry Schein's about a $10 billion company, right? That's huge. It's enormous. Cardinal Health is a $150 billion company. So you put things in perspective, the dental industry has got a lot of very big companies, but they're small in comparison to the medical device or the orthopedics, pharma industry. So you really got to do a couple things really, really well, because, as we said earlier, new products get adopted very slowly here. So you need to have a great channel strategy. And I think this is what Geistfish has done very well. But that's kind of the old school. And again, Donna, I don't want to follow you again because you took a lot of my points here, but a lot of the new way of selling, marketing is totally going to be different. You know, we've seen now Medtronic acquiring Touch Surgery. You know, how do you really train clinicians on surgical technique without an army of 300 sales reps? You know, Geistfish, we only have 23, 24 sales territories. So how do you go out and train digitally, virtually? There's new selling approaches. There's a company called Vtail that's now virtual detail. What does that mean for a sales rep going forward? The Instagrams and YouTubes and so forth. And there's this little company called Amazon that's getting into the dental industry. So, you know, how is that going to affect how new technologies come to market? Not just latex gloves or consumables, but really truly innovative, novel, regenerative technologies. Don't know, but get ready, it's going to happen. And that whole process, both from a regulatory standpoint and a channel management standpoint, is untapped areas. So I guess from I'll wrap it up here. What Geistfish has done a very good job of, and I encourage anybody with novel technologies coming through, make sure you have a really good, strong basis of your science. Develop your KOL network, and it doesn't need to be 100. It needs to be 3 or 4 or 5 team members that you can partner with. And frankly, Geistfish has done a lot with Dr. McGuire and Dr. Shire at the IMAC Institute, really testing our products. We've had some great clinical outcome and some not so exciting, and that's good. It's the feedback we need so we can really tailor properly. And then, you know, figure out how to capitalize on both the, I'll call it old school channel management, but also the whole new frontier, because I think it's a lot faster, it's a lot less expensive, you can expand your reach much more quickly. And as someone said, this COVID world has changed all of us. I mean, look, we are in a COVID forum right now, right? Still, and this isn't going to change. You know, I think it's going to be interesting what the future of the AMOS and the AAP meetings means in terms of getting up on a podium and making a lecture to 400, 500 people versus being able to do that every day virtually. I think it's the next 20 years, the next 5 years are going to be really very different from the last period we just came through. So thank you. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts and any questions.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thanks to everybody. I think round of applause for an excellent panel. We were very honored to have this group of people and our 2 keynote speakers here today. Before we open up for Q&A, and again, if you have questions, go to the Q&A function. If possible, direct the question to somebody specific, but if not, I will try to direct it based on what your question is. Before we do that, though, I want just first to invite our representatives from NIDCR. I see that both Nadia Lumelski and Lillian Schum are both here still, I believe. At least I'm not seeing their faces, but I'm seeing their names. So I'm hoping, there we are, that one or both of you might want to say a few words based on what you've heard about this topic of translation and the work that the consortium is doing. So you guys figure out who goes first, or who's going to represent NIDCR.
Hi, everyone. This is Lillian Schum, and I'm the program officer for the U54 based in Michigan, and Dr. Lumelski is the project scientist. So we're a real team, at NIDCR, but we're also collaborators and partners with the U54 operation. And it's a real pleasure because this is a journey that we're taking with you. There are many lessons learned. We're learning, on our end as well, but it's great to have, met new people in the preclinical and the clinical space. I want to thank Jeannie and your co-organizer for putting together this session. It is truly, truly enlightening because it really touched on very specific and needed aspects of continuing this product development and clinical adoption spectrum so that, the products and the technologies can actually get to the patient. So I really appreciate and I learn a lot from that. So, maybe we can go to the Q&A, but specifically, I also have some questions. Perhaps I can, at least seed it, before Dr. Lemowski speaks. One thing is, sometimes we think of technologies and sophisticated products as also being expensive with high costs. And I wonder if, in the grand scheme of things, in the longevity of really pushing regenerative medicine, how should we think about, reaching the underserved, reaching people maybe with no insurance, how to make products that can actually, be affordable? Is it just an issue of scale, or is there something more specific, area that we can focus on, like 3D printing? Seems like it's fairly affordable. Is there room to focus on those aspects? So I'll stop there and I'll let Nadia speak.
Great, and we'll come back to your question, Lillian, after Nadia speaks, because I can think a few people on our panel may have something to say about that. So Nadia?
Yes, hello. I very much echo what Lillian just said. This was a extremely informative session for me, because it addressed, this notion that getting the FDA approval is not the end, but just the beginning, and with all the steps that lie, post-approval, and that, determine the success of your technology. Although I'm aware of it, but the speakers were very informative about specifics of what it means. And I think it must be very informative for our DocTRC community. So I very much appreciate what I've heard. In terms of questions, I have a kind of I think, question which would be difficult to answer, and that is how good the technology should be to maximize the chance of its success downstream. And that's what DocTRC does. I mean, that's what the whole process is that DocTRC is involved, is trying to estimate, is it good enough? Should we continue to support it, or should we terminate it? I mean, we know that in real life, many clinical trials fail because they fail at that stage of efficacy. They just not turn out to be not good enough, although the maybe animal preclinical studies were promising. So how can we optimize this process? I know this is a very difficult question, but maybe we can get some input on this.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Nadia. Let's do that one first, and then we'll come back to Lillian, because I think that Nadia's question really probably is something that everybody has thoughts about. And we'll start with our first speaker, Will Gianobili. I mean, you certainly are in the trenches with this, trying to think about how do we determine if it's good enough to be likely to then do well in clinicals, because you'd really like to know that before you make that investment in clinicals, and so would your investors like to know that. We've seen products go through clinicals in the space that may have had pretty marginal data and still get pushed onto the market because there's so much investor pressure at that point, and that doesn't always work out so well. So let's start with you, Will. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that's one area that Nadia has brought up, that as a part of this ITP program, the whole consortium has worked diligently to look through this to see, is it good enough? And so quality preclinical data and vetting these technologies, if you can't show that some surrogate that would eventually apply into the clinical arena is reproducible at that level, you're not likely going to see it at the clinical level. And so oftentimes doing quality studies, looking at every sample, not just the mean levels, really, dissecting apart some of those results in a few models that might be clinically relevant. And I think people have to be, very transparent on those initial studies to see that, is this something that's going to be able to handle the test of the clinical trial, the early stage clinical trial. And so I think it's very important to vet those technologies there before you go into the clinic, because I think the bar just keeps going up exponentially higher and more of a challenge when you get into humans, where there's so many other variables. You can't have the same strain of human beings that you could test in the animal setting. And so if it doesn't look like a very robust response there, it's unlikely you will see it in the human situation. So that's one of the starts. Down the road, as we look at personalized medicine, precision medicine, we might be able to identify specific patient populations that might respond better, but certainly can turn this over to some of the industry folks as well, who have seen things that look very good preclinically, and they just totally are a bust when they get into the clinic.
Yeah, and just before doing that, Mike McGuire too, I'd like you to weigh in based on what you're thinking about when you're doing clinical assessments of these ITP projects or submitted projects. What things come to mind for you that suggest that this might be good enough to actually adopt in the marketplace?
As Will said, you've got to have something that is, it's for, as a clinician, and we give it lip service a lot, but it has to be clinically significant, not just statistically significant. And there have been many products that have been brought on that you really have to work at it to make this, to believe that this is an improvement of what's out there, because it may be statistically significant, but as a clinician, it's not something that's really bowling them over. And a little off of what you're asking, but I was thinking as Will was talking, and it goes back to Donna's, her MDGAIN, that when I think about what creates clinical adoption, yes, you have to have a product that's meaningful to the clinician, is meaningful to the practitioner, but it also has to be put in the front of the practitioner again and again and again and again. And unfortunately, a lot of companies that pick these products up, they either don't understand the importance of that, or they can't afford to do that. And I think one of the things that made MDGAIN so successful is, from the beginning of when that was put forth to the profession to today, if I go pick up any of my perio journals, I guarantee you there will be at least one, maybe two articles that have on enamel matrix derivative. That is how you penetrate the market. You have to have it in front of the clinicians all of the time. And I think that at first, yes, it's the company that has to do it. But after that, it begins to have a bit of a life of its own, because, well, if this is so good, then I want to do research on this. I want to do this. And I'm guessing that the company that owns it they're not spending as much on promoting this, because other people are doing this for you. But I think that's one of the key things is it really has to be in front of the clinicians for a long time to make a penetration, unless this is something that really is a groundbreaker, and there's not a lot of those.
Yeah, so I guess I'd like to just pick on Donna on this question of what would be good enough, and you've done change of behavior marketing. You've had to make that judgment many times. And Donna, unmute.
I'm gonna learn that yet. First of all, I completely agree with Will, and a very, very wise venture capitalist who invested in one of my companies told us all the time, kill it fast, kill it early, for a very different reason than what you're saying, Will. It's because they don't want to spend the 80, 100, $200 million to take something all the way through to market if it's not good. And so they really, really profess that you have pristine studies at the beginning and you are checking everything because you want to make sure it gets to phase 2 and it gets to phase 3 and it still has relevance. So, Will, I couldn't agree with you more. The other thing that Mike said, which is also so true, is clinically significant. If it's statistically significant, but the clinician cannot see it readily, that's a very difficult thing. The other thing you also have to be careful of, and it's not exactly the question that was asked, but was more about how much do you study something? Because things come out to the market and they could be improved. It could be good enough, but it's a Gen 1 product. I don't mean that it would ever be unsafe or lacking in quality, but you may be able to do future generations that have more efficacy or are more easy to handle or some such things. So continued research is important, but you also have to be careful that you don't do too much without doing your homework and making sure there's truly an unmet need. There's a significant amount of the market that would desire and use this. Very famous gentleman, most of us know, Jan Lindy told me about Emdogain. Be very careful or you're going to study yourself right out of a product. So you have to watch that you don't make it so narrow that you're studying the tiniest little things. And everybody's excited about new technologies and wants to try this and wants to try that. But you need to be sure that there's enough of a market and it's clinically relevant.
Thanks, Donna. And I want to come back to Lillian's question about access with products that are often more expensive just because of the nature of the research and in some case the technology itself. What is the opportunity to reach underserved markets? And I'm going to start with Maria because she's had probably with not necessarily this type of product, but certainly is in a company that makes a real effort to do that. So maybe you can at least shed some light there on some of the thinking that a company might have about that, Maria. And then I'll go to Sam because I think Sam also had a product that was quite expensive to make and might have some thoughts on that too. But we'll start with Maria.
Thanks, Jeannie. Yeah. Oh, let me. Okay.
You're good.
I mean, I think oral health inequities is something that comes up all the time. It is front and center for a lot of people, especially as the World Health Organization recognizes a lot of oral diseases as being major issues throughout the world and how to address those. And so, for example, you know, as we get into connected technologies and precision oral health, you know, people ask, how are you going to increase the oral health inequities or are you going to decrease it? And so as a large consumer products company, we're developing the very expensive, you know, plaqueless brush that can detect plaque as you're brushing and is going to be at the higher end, but also connected technologies on the manual side. So we're trying to do both. Coming from previous world of doing regenerative studies, etc., they're not inexpensive. They cost money. And certainly, you know, I think I'm curious to hear what Sam has to say about it, but for those patients who want to save their teeth, it is very worthwhile to them, right? So they are looking at, you know, maintaining what they have and practicing in as a periodontist for many years. People would prefer that we would use products like Emdogain and Gem 21 and other products to try and maintain what they had rather than going in other routes. But you know, every practitioner is different and it's all how you discuss it with your patients and the value. And I think Greg brought that up. Value is very important. How does the patient value this? And do the insurance companies cover this, right? Those are all sorts of things that have to be, you know, taken into consideration. So I'm going to hand it over to Sam. I'm looking forward to hear what he has to say.
Okay, thanks, Maria. I'm not sure I can add much to what you offered already on that, but as Jeannie pointed out, you know, Gem 21, you know, is a relatively speaking, expensive product in dentistry. But one of the challenges that we have here is that what is relatively expensive in dentistry is incredibly cheap in other parts of medicine, right? So many of you probably know that, you know, for really a decade, most of my efforts were focused in orthopedics. And so the equivalent of the GEM 21 product for orthopedic applications costs anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 a dose. And yet we encounter resistance at $250 a dose in dentistry, right? 1/10 the price. And so I think it certainly is a challenge, but as I look at it and having experience in both areas, in our orthopedic applications, there is an alternative, right, for what we call augment bone graft in orthopedics, which is exactly the same thing as GEM 21 in dental. The orthopedic surgeon can go to the proximal tibia or the iliac crust, get autogenous bone, and that's what they did for years, right? And yet they're willing to pay $2,500, $3,000 not to do that, but to use an off-the-shelf product because really of reimbursement. I mean, let's face it, and insurance coverage. But it also means benefits for the patient, right? Elimination of that second surgical site. It's a quicker OR procedure if you don't have to open up the second surgical site. It's less pain for the patient. And I think we need to learn how to talk better to the clinicians about those types of advantages. You know, to Maria's point, a lot of patients, I think, would pay, if they can at all, if they can afford it at all, more, right, for products that will speed their recovery time or mean that there's, you know, less post-op pain or less post-op swelling. If it's explained by the clinician in that context. So that's one thing. And I think maybe where Lillian was coming from as well is, you know, how do we make our products more affordable, even though we think they're affordable now, as I was just trying to articulate. And I know we've spent, since I've come back into the dental world, 2 years trying to optimize our manufacturing process and bring it into, you know, current scale up standards and get it all revalidated with FDA to make it more efficient and more stable. So I think that's another point. Now that we've done that, you know, there may be some additional pricing flexibility, you know, that we can offer. So I think that, you know, there's different ways that you know, we can approach the question.
Yeah, and certainly for the ITPs, being very aware of manufacturability issues and the cost of goods that give you more flexibility in pricing downstream.
Yeah.
To the extent that you can control that, those are really critical decisions that are being made now that you'll live with for a long time. So we have another question here that I'm going to try on this one to ask panelists and Drs. McGuire and Giannobili to raise hands if you'd like to answer this one. And that has to do with the difficulties small biotech companies encounter trying to license technologies out of universities. So several of these ITPs have technologies or IP that lives still in the university. They're trying to get it out. What are the standard kinds of agreements that small biotech can expect in dealing with these negotiations? So I'm just going to ask anybody who has some experience with that, if you want to raise your hand. And it looks like Maria has her hand up. So Maria, can you shed some light on that?
Well, I don't know which side it's coming from, but if you're an investigator within the university, right, then those licensing agreements usually comes through your tech transfer office, and sometimes they'll actually create a an agreement, a draft license agreement that could go out to a small biotech company, right? Now, if you're in a small biotech company, you might say, is this a good agreement? Isn't this a good agreement? And it really, as I mentioned earlier, depends on what stage the technology's at. I mean, if it's very early on, sometimes it's just about paying for the patents and creating certain milestones as things move along. But if it's very advanced, well, then they're going to be asking for quite a bit more. And so if you're a small startup company and you don't know if this is good or bad, you know, maybe you should get a consultant who's a business development person. Maybe you could ask other small companies that might be licensing technologies at similar stages that you might have interactions with, or even work maybe with angel investors who have early stage technologies that you could ask them questions. But, you know, usually in a university, if you have a good tech transfer office, they're going to put together a draft agreement going out the door based on their experience in licensing multiple technologies from within the university. I mean, one of the things that we learned early on was that the milestones were not where they needed to be. And so we actually had to teach our tech transfer office that you want to make sure there are certain milestones for licensing the technology. Otherwise, sometimes, you know, a company can go very slow or sit on it, and, you know, the clock ticks on your patent. So you don't want it to be forever to get to where you need to go, because the value continues to move down the longer it takes.
Thanks, Maria. This one I'm going to direct to Jean Dorff, and it's a question about how, even if you have an NDA in place, how much proprietary information should these small startups projects really expose in talks with a big company like yours, or with any company?
You know, I don't think you should be concerned about, you know, what you share with the big companies. And I know that as an inventor or as a researcher, you might be concerned about that. But you know, the reason why large companies are generally talking to you is because they are not doing this work on their own, and they are not likely to go, you know, and based upon some information they glean, you know, through a due diligence process, you know, go start their own effort. That, you know, you don't have to worry about that with a big company. Perhaps when you're sharing with a smaller company or a competitor that's entrepreneurial, it might be something else. But large companies, you're going to find that they're probably not going to put their resources into something they've learned you know, from you. And they also happen to have pretty good structures in place on their own in terms of compliance and regulation that, you know, it's within the company, but they're not looking to take on that risk.
Great, thanks, Jean. This question is actually directed to Donna. And what are some of the main frustrations or misunderstandings that have come up when working with medical investors on dental technologies? And do you have any tips for ITPs in overcoming them?
I certainly have the frustrations, not so many tips. You're absolutely correct. First of all, it seems medical people think that dentistry is just a subset of medical, not its own discipline, with all the different specialties underneath it. So they require a lot of education to just understand that part of it. They also don't understand reimbursement at all, because we don't have reimbursement. We have an indemnity plan, and it's very limited. So they don't get that either. So that has to be explained. And then I mentioned when I talked earlier, their expectations post-launch. They're used to in medical having all the problems before launch. They've got their reimbursement in place. They've got everything done. So the market adopts much quicker. So that's an issue. And I will tell you, if they become investors, it continues. Even though I had multiple years of experience in dental, my medical investors that were board members didn't buy what I was telling them. So ultimately what I did in the fundraising stage, I brought in a number of KOLs that could talk to them directly without us on the phone, so that they could just ask any question they wanted about the technology, about the dental market. And then when I had a board full of medical people, I brought in a dental person as an external member, so that if he said it, oh, then it must be true. If I said it, it probably wasn't. So those aren't great tips, but that's the way I managed it. And it is a problem in the the angel VC world. There's not many investors out there that.
We lost you, Donna.
Yeah, shoot, we did lose Donna. Okay, I'm gonna, we'll assume Donna will get back on. I'm gonna direct this question to Greg Bosch, and it has to do with the limitations of reimbursement of dental insurance and how this plays into the hesitancy and adoption in dentistry versus the insurance reimbursement and cost coverage system in medicine. If you could talk about, you've worked in both worlds and lived in both worlds, contrast how that plays out in adoption.
Again, I'm following on Donna's theme. She was hitting on that very point. I mean, at the end of the day, where the products are not specific, the products or the procedure is not specifically reimbursed. Essentially, there's got to be a way that the clinician and the practice can figure out how to use it and ultimately get a better patient outcome, which is of course the goal. That is, the patient recognizes and willing to pay for, or can cover it under its overall cost structure. It's completely different from, especially in the pharma side, where you go for specific reimbursements for specific drugs for specific indications. And that, I think, I went back to my go back to my comment earlier about the size of the differences of the markets between dental and the others. And you look at a lot of the technologies, and Sam can speak to PDGF as an example, right? That was originally a large part of that development was in the wound care space, right? So you're piggybacking off of other applications where there is a greater market, perhaps not even because the numbers are bigger, but the price paid is bigger. And as evident by the example with PDGF and the dental, which is not reimbursed, versus in orthopedics where it is. So it is a significant impact on the adoption rate in general of new technologies, the adoption of new technology in general, and the rate of the adoption. It impacts both of those very greatly. And I think everyone would acknowledge that Geisler sees this, and as do other companies, there are some markets around the world where, say, an implant is reimbursed. Most places it's not. I mean, how is it covered? And that has a great impact on the adoption and the penetration and the coverage for the underserved as well. I mean, that back to the question that's brought up earlier. So it's a very significant rate limiter in technology adoption.
Thanks, Greg. This question is for Jean, and it has to do with preclinical study outcomes. So you talked a bit about clinical study and some of the things that industry partners might look at. This question is whether there's anything in preclinical study outcomes that may be interesting for future acquirers that may be missed in traditional study designs and outcomes. Anything you can think of that you might be looking for in preclinical studies?
I think that the same rules that apply to clinical studies apply to preclinical studies as well. You really want to do your best job in trying to scope that out and define it and get some clear evidence that the concept is going to work and be proven. And it depends. You're still learning at that point, but the documentation and looking at the entire study as opposed to some limited samples probably helps as well. But preclinical is always, particularly in a development scenario, having some preclinical data is always very helpful to when you're trying to appeal for investment. So.
Thanks, Jean. That's helpful. And then this actually is the last question, but I'm going to direct this one to Nadia and Lillian because it's talking about funding for clinicals. And there are a lot of nuances in this question, but the bottom line is if funding is not directly available for clinical through this program, what direction, input, additional support can be provided to open doors for other funding programs? Is the more the consortium could be doing there, which do not ideally dilute, but build on the commercial opportunities for the ITP startups. So if you guys have thoughts on that, and then we'll open it up if others do as well.
Yeah, so from the government side, our setup is, we have distinct programs and then we invest in specific initiatives. So outside of the, DocTRC initiative, we do fund clinical trials to test biologics, drugs, devices. And so really, if an ITP wishes to graduate from the U24 and go into the clinical trial program, they can apply to the mechanism. Is a bit of an alphabet soup there. It's called UG3, UH3, funding opportunity. The first phase being a planning stage so that you can develop your clinical protocol, you can have your statistical plan, you can have a data quality plan and, have those in place. And NIDCR will convene an independent monitoring board, DSMB, for the clinical trial so that the second phase will be the implementation phase. Obviously, investigators can seek support from, what Dr. Lynch already, alluded to, the 7 buckets of funding to also support the clinical trial, either co-funding what the government can, would be able to support or in its entirety.
Thanks, Lillian. Nadia, do you want to add to that, or you're muted? Nadia, you're muted.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I have nothing to add. I think that's
Okay.
really described it very well. Thank you.
Perfect. So at this point, what I'm going to do is just ask our panelists, all of you, if there was a question you were hoping would be asked, or a point that you were hoping to share with the ITPs that you haven't had a chance to share. Raise your hands, because now would be our chance to get in perhaps a message that we missed that would be important. And we even have Donna back, so that's great. So any additional thoughts that you, and Mike McGuire's waiting. Okay, Mike, you're muted, but.
Yeah, just a quick comment following up on a second ago on reimbursement. I think for the ITP projects that are going to be in the dental arena, I wouldn't get too worried about reimbursement. I mean, it's really a big deal in medicine, but in dental, it's not so much. And for example, I don't take any insurance. We're not on any insurance plans in my practice. And when I do surgery, I can't imagine me doing a surgery. No, but I can't get somebody to allow me, or I'd have difficulty getting somebody to allow me to do surgery just to clean out the disease, to eliminate the disease. I do surgery with the hope of regeneration. And so we're providing value, we're providing hope, we're providing, it goes to those kind of things. And so that's, it's the disease versus the health model. Are you in the disease business or the health business? And to be successful today, you need to be in the health business. And so if you're in the health business, then reimbursement doesn't mean all that much. And so my suggestion is don't get so hung up on can I get this covered, completely or partially. I mean, if it's easy and you can do it, sure. But I don't think that that's going to be critical to your success depending on your particular project. Just something I wanted to interject.
And Mike, you might want to clarify, because I think it's an important thing that I happen to know because I know about your practice, but your nature of your practice in terms of socioeconomics and diversity within your practice of your patient population?
Yeah, we have broad diversity. I mean, we have, people from the lowest of low economics all the way up to presidents of the United States. And I can tell you categorically that you can't decide who's going to accept treatment based on their economic status. Some of our very best patients really have difficulty affording it, but because they value it, they find a way to pay for it. And so, I just think it's an important message that, try to build value, try to know what it is that you're selling. You're selling health and not disease, and give your patients the opportunity to accept the best. Don't think that they're not going to accept something, so you don't offer it. Always accept the best. Always propose the best.
Which comes full circle back to Nadia's comment about it needs to be good. It needs to be valuable, right? I mean, you can't add value without having a valuable product.
Right.
So I think seeing no hands, unless somebody wants to wave a hand. I am going to wrap this up and thank all of you again. This was quite an outstanding lineup, in my humble opinion, and I appreciate all of you taking time out of your incredibly busy lives, not only to be here today, but to give this thought and be in exchange prior to the meeting, building up to this this event. So I just want to thank all of you personally and on behalf of the Resource Center. I think, you know, this has been really helpful. Hopefully our ITP project leaders will feel so as well.